The prisoner swap. I feel like I should talk a bit about that. I think it really was a crowning moment for Joe Biden. And of course, it just drove the orange dipshit completely out of his crawl space. Some of the comments the orange bastard has been making since the prisoner swap occurred are just, well, revealing. Trump is such an arrogant, narcissistic prick that, he was the one who could only the one to get Putin to release the prisoners. It was his deal. And what did his hillbilly half-witted partner say, J.D. Vance? The only reason the prisoners were released is because Putin is afraid of Trump. Putin would make sandwiches out of Trump. Putin doesn't give a shit about Trump. He sees him as what he is, a useful idiot. But I digress. That massive multi-country prisoner swap with Russia that occurred yesterday. And they're saying, they being government officials, are saying it's the largest prisoner swap since the end of the Cold War. I know some people have been misquoting that and saying since the end of World War II. But no matter how you look at it, it was a major diplomatic achievement for Joe Biden less than 6 months before he is to leave office. And the part that was really admirable, as far as I'm concerned, was he knew that the prisoner swap was going to occur. 6 hours later, he announced he's not running for re-election. I mean, come on. We pretty much are in agreement that Joe had reached a point where he could no longer handle the horrific responsibilities of being the president of the United States. But we've got to give him credit for this. Good God. Now, of course, Ivan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter, was one of those released. Former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan. And it was the first major foreign policy action since he announced last month that he wasn't going to seek re-election. But unbeknownst to any of us, I don't know how many of his I guess his inner circle were aware of this, but we weren't, were we? You and me, the general public, the orange puke bastard. None of us were aware that these negotiations, to the degree that they were occurring, had been going on and had been intensifying and had involved 24 prisoners, 7 countries, negotiations that involved allies and adversaries. I mean, can you imagine Trump doing this? I'll pause while you laugh or gag. Okay, that's enough. Anyway, Biden and Harris were right there to greet Whelan and Gershkovich and, a Russian-American journalist, Alsu Kurmasheva. They all arrived late last night at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. Their families were waiting, along with Biden and Harris on the tarmac to receive them. After watching these emotional family reunions late last night, Biden said this, quote, "I was absolutely convinced we could get it done. I meant it when I said alliances make a difference. They stepped up and took a chance for us, and it mattered a lot." Now, you know what his reference is there, of course. This useless piece of shit, Donald Trump. You know, he's the king of his own little twisted mind, and he doesn't need alliances. No, he doesn't need shit. All he needs is the Proud Boys and these goofy fuckers who run around trying to pretend like they're real military people. That's all Trump needs, right? He doesn't need alliances or schmalliances. I don't need any shit like that. I am the man. Me, look at me, look at me. Now, earlier in the day, yesterday, I'm sure we've all seen the pictures where Biden was in I guess it was the Oval Office, and the families of the prisoners who were released were with him. He praised, and rightly so, U.S. alliances that helped make the deal possible. And if nobody was paying attention, that was an implicit kick in the ass to the orange vomits criticisms of NATO. Anyway, Biden said, raising his voice, which he can't help himself, anyone who questions if allies matter, they do. They matter. That's a quote from him. And here's another quote for him. He said, quote, today is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world, friends you could trust, work with, depend upon, especially in matters of great consequence and sensitivity like this, end quote. Well, yeah, that is, I think it's implicit in everything that global leaders are supposed to do. I mean, it's a goddamn shame that we have to have global leaders. You know what I mean? I've talked about this before, that the world has to be divided by ethnicity and race and language and religion and geography. But that's where we are. After 200,000 years of evolution, we haven't learned yet that the survival of one group of us will determine the survival of all of us. I don't know why that hasn't been made clear, except to philosophers and poets. Well, I guess there's still hope, right? The orange puke had to get his shitty 2 cents worth in. He questioned the whole deal, and he wants to know what was given up in the exchange. He called the negotiations, get this, an embarrassment for you, you obese orange prick, you. So Trump wrote this on social media, and this is another clear example of how disgusting this son of a bitch is, and why the tens of millions of Americans who still support him should hang their heads in goddamn shame. You don't belong in this country if you support this Nazi fuck. But this is what he wrote, quote, are we releasing murderers, killers, or thugs? Just curious, because we never make good deals at anything, but especially hostage swaps. They're all extorting the United States of America. They're calling the trade complex. Well, that's so nobody can figure out how bad it is. End quote, you ignorant prick, you. Oh, my God. Keep flapping your jaws, Orange Vomit. You're just digging your hole deeper. And then he was on some internet show run by a couple of, I don't know, knuckle-dragging assholes named Clay Travis and Book Sexton. Last night, he was on Clay and Book's show, and he said in the interview, that would be the Biden administration, they allowed some really rough people out. Oh, really? No shit. But that's what you do, Orange Vomit, when you're trying to bring prisoners home. Oh, I know what the Orange Vomit would have done. He would have stood up on his hind legs with his little accordion motions with his hands, his little squeeze-box motions, and he would have said something to Putin like, you let my people go. Now, I've been backing you ever since you invaded Ukraine and started murdering hundreds of thousands. Give me... Until Putin just looked at him and shook his head and walked out of the room. But this prisoner swap with Russia, I mean, let's face it, it's one of a whole bunch of foreign policy difficulties that Biden has had to deal with. Not the least of which, matter of fact, the worst of them is the Israel-Hamas situation, or I shouldn't put it that way, the Israel-Palestinian situation, the ethnic cleansing that has been attempted by the fascist prick from Israel, Netanyahu. Plus, Biden has had to deal with helping Ukraine keep up its fight against Russia. And when you have a contender, this hillbilly prick from wherever he's from, Southern Ohio, J.D. Vance, when you have him screeching and showing his ass about, we're never going to support Ukraine again, I mean, fuck them, which is essentially what J.D. has been saying. And, he wants to be vice president. He wants to be a heartbeat away from the president. Trump doesn't even know who the fuck he is. If Vance walked into a room with a bunch of Trump's teenage little honeys, Trump would never see him. But Biden has had to overcome the fascist pricks, the Christian fascist bastards in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate in Biden's efforts to try to get military aid to Ukraine. Biden has had to deal with some pretty explicit, from me included, criticism about his open-ended support of the bastard Netanyahu in Israel. And I have no idea. I mean, Trump has all the answers, that piece of shit. But I have no idea how a president deals with all of this, how Biden, especially in his mental state. And I say that respectfully, okay? I'm not trying to be an arrogant bastard and say, well, he should never have been president. Of course he should have been. But even he said at the beginning, he was a transitional president. He had no business going back on what he said and deciding to run again when his decline is I hate to keep saying it, but his mental decline was so obvious. But even in that state, Joe Biden is 100 times more effective at this stuff because of the people with whom he's surrounded himself where it comes to these international crises, these international Gordian knots, where what to do, how do I do this, how do I solve this? No one man can do that. And most of the people who have become president of the United States knew that from the get-go. But the orange filth, the silly bastard Donald Trump, oh, well, no, it doesn't apply to him. He has all the answers. He knows exactly what to do. He doesn't need any help. He is Jesus Christ's little brother. He has been ordained by God to come down here and fuck everything up. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.